Welcome back to Sidewalk, Skyline podcast. My guest today is Tim Fletcher. Tim's the founder and president of REACT, which stands for Recovery Education for Addictions and Complex Trauma. He used his skills as a pastor and a counselor to develop a program to help the people he cared for overcome addiction. And he realized the need for individuals to first become equipped with tools and then put those tools into practice in a healthy, safe, and loving environment. And herein lies Tim's unique skill. Welcome, Tim. We want to talk today about complex trauma and recovery. And I'd like to hear some of your story before we get too deep in just getting to know you a bit over a few chance meetings, and now today a little more intentional. You've kind of getting a little bit of a phenom status in the complex trauma world. You were telling me earlier that you were just on the Theo Vaughn show, and how that session went. And for those who don't know Theo Vaughn, he's an American comedian with a huge internet following. And what were some of your early influences?
Yep. So I grew up in Simcoe, Ontario, in tobacco country at that time.
Did you pick tobacco in the summer?
No, we weren't allowed to.
Oh, you're a good Christian boy.
Yeah, I worked
Yep.
on vegetable farms. But I grew up in a conservative evangelical Christian home. My dad became a pastor when I was 13. And I would say for the most part, like a very healthy pastoral home. We were allowed to be kids. We were allowed to grow up and be authentic. And so lots of very positive things. I think it was around 12 that I really felt this deep calling in my heart to serve pastorally, and really focus my life at beginning to kind of prepare for that. So I went from being very active in sports and everything in high school to all of a sudden I just wanted to come home and study and start to learn as much as I could. And this was like at 13 years old. So I was always a bit of a unique kid as far as I just thought deeper than a lot of kids my age. And so became a pastor, and to become a pastor, you needed to get a university education. So I went to the University of Waterloo, got my degree in math and computers, and got hired by General Motors to program computers. So came to Windsor, and we loved Windsor, got married here, and after programming computers for a few years was ordained, because I did all kind of the studying in the evenings and stuff. And I'd gone to Bible school for a year, but then did everything else kind of in the evenings.
Where'd you go to Bible college?
In Peterborough.
Okay.
Kawartha Lakes.
Kawartha Lakes, yeah.
Yeah. So we got asked to be involved in a church plan in Chatham, which we did for a year, and then I just realized that really wasn't my gift set. Mm-hmm. And so we got asked to go to Winnipeg, and we were there for 33 years. But after 10 years, I burnt myself out, basically. And what I look back and realize now was growing up in a Christian home, pastoral home, is kind of two things were at work that were presented as healthy that were actually quite unhealthy. So love was kind of presented as no boundaries. You just serve people.
Unconditional love.
Yeah.
All the time, everywhere.
Never say no.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is you got to always be working.
Mm-hmm.
And if you relax, you're being lazy or selfish. If you take care of yourself, that's not being a loving person, that's being selfish. And the other thing for me was growing up, kind of a lot of British influence in my upbringing, from my parents, and you just didn't show emotions.
Mm-hmm.
So emotions, you could show them a little bit, but not too much.
Right. Right.
And so you had to stuff a lot of stuff, and stress, you just dug a little bit deeper or pushed a little harder. That's
Yeah.
how you got through everything. So that worked great when I was young and had tons of energy and
Yeah.
didn't have as many responsibilities. But after being a pastor, then we had 3 children back to back. And so at 32, I had a 1-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a 4-year-old, a church that was growing, and I was just pushing, not taking care, and I burnt myself out. So I was diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia. Then I really entered into kind of, I pushed on. The church allowed me to kind of work half, 2/3 time for a while, but I eventually just burnt myself physically out as well as emotionally, and had to go on disability. And went through really 7 very dark years of physical health problems, deep depression, anxiety issues. Came, as you know, in Canada, after 2 years on disability, you're kind of booted off. So I worked on farms again. And I worked on, it was actually very therapeutic, worked with animals, worked with grain farms in Manitoba. And after doing that for about 5 years, a lady that I used to pastor came to me and just said, she worked at a treatment center, and said, we need a male counselor, and I think you'd be good for it. And I said, no, I don't think so. I just blew her off. And about 6 months later, she came back and said, Tim, we still need a male counselor, and I really, really think you'd be the guy. Would you at least come for the interview? Mm-hmm. I said, okay, I'll go. No promises, though. I don't think I'm able to handle this kind of stuff again. And so I went, and they offered me the job. And I said, okay, I'll say yes, but I'll kind of give a 3-month test period, because I'm not sure I'm going to be able to handle this. And about my second day, sitting and working with people, really, and that was the only treatment center in Canada that saw addiction as a symptom of deeper problems. And so they were the very early pioneers in saying people with addiction issues are trying to solve their pain. What's their pain about? Where's it coming from? And so I'm listening to these people share very authentically, deep level, and I'm going, I think all of my life events are preparing me for this, and I just felt at home. And then what happened shortly after that, because at that point trauma wasn't even really on the radar anywhere, complex trauma wasn't even a term. Dr. Gabor Maté in Vancouver came out with his book In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts, and just talked about all of his patients who had addiction issues all had childhood trauma. And that just really brought everything kind of into focus, that this is the term, this is it. And so I just began to read and study everything I could get my hands on around understanding trauma and its connection to addiction. And that was very much in line with what I was already discovering just in working with clients, and what was already out there. Went under adult children of alcoholics, adult children of dysfunction, but there was already some good stuff happening. So I had the privilege of really being at the right time in the right place, the pioneer, really exploring all of this. And because of Gabor Maté being a Canadian, he was very popular in the Canadian treatment centers. So everybody was talking about being trauma-informed, and trauma's the issue with addiction, blah, blah, blah. So I got asked to meet with, I think it was 5 or 6 of the directors of the different treatment centers in Manitoba. And they were all talking about trauma. And I just said, like, how many of you guys are willing to change your programs in order to actually deal with trauma? Not one of them was willing to change their program. I go, really? Like, you're all saying this is, because the success rate at that point for treatment centers was less than 10% were staying clean and sober.
Right, right.
And I go, if we know trauma is actually what's the problem, you're not willing to change our programs. Funding issues, government issues, blah, blah, blah. And so I said, okay. And I did not want to start a treatment center. I had no interest in that, but nobody else was. So I spent about 3 years really thinking about what would this look like. And then we had people approach us and said, we are wanting to start a thrift shop. We'd like to put the money into funding you starting a treatment center. And so, okay, that seemed to bring that financial piece together. So we, 2016, started React. And we saw within the first year, over 50% of our clients were staying clean and sober.
Wow.
And it's like, when you deal with the root causes, all of a sudden you see huge differences. So that's kind of been...
Yeah, I'm also a pastor's kid. And, in fact, when I was wrestling with God about this idea of this being a vocation for me, I used to say, that's the last thing in the world I'd want to do. Partially, I think, because I watched just the human reality that my parents were exposed to in church life and dealing with people. I watched my parents both go through, different aspects of burnout and anxiety and things like that, and I just said, boy, that doesn't look like something that I would want to pour myself into. So I had to work through some things with God before I was able to say, okay, this could be risky behavior, but is it a risk worth taking? And so it's really interesting. You talk about 10 years deep, you experienced that burnout. Was that stemming from any kind of trauma, either historical or emerging, or was it just dealing with a mindset that you had to don't cry and work hard?
Yeah. So to me, it's been so many of the people that I deal with, they go, well, I don't have any trauma, and what they tend to think of is what we would define as big T trauma. They haven't had any horrific accident, anything bad that's happened to them.
They weren't in Vietnam.
Right. But that's only a small percentage of what we now understand as trauma.
Yeah.
The majority of trauma is little T trauma. And that's, I'll get into that, but over 80% of people have little T trauma, but they don't even know they have it.
Yeah.
So some big T trauma is something horrific happening to you. Little T trauma is something that should have happened to you but didn't. So a need wasn't met that should have been met.
Okay.
So a lot of my work is helping people see the subtleties of little T trauma. And people that come from what seems like good homes, but they were neglected in certain areas.
Yeah.
Their needs weren't met consistently. And so the result is the child feels alone, doesn't feel seen, doesn't feel heard, doesn't feel safe, doesn't know how to meet those needs. So part of that is well-intentioned parents who have operate off some bad teaching. And you end up, so if you look at what I got, where you work all the time and you love with no boundaries, what you do is you set up for yourself a trauma environment.
Right.
Because now you're not safe. You can't protect yourself because you always have to go. Your nervous system is always in stress mode activated. Well, that's trauma. So you create trauma just from bad teaching. And so I look back at my life and I go, in many ways, I had an amazing, wonderful home there. I got thousands of healthy tools, but the overall environment was actually a trauma environment.
Right.
Because you were constantly in this environment where you had to be on guard, ready to go, giving, working. You couldn't relax.
That was the pebble in your shoe.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so that overwhelms your nervous system eventually,
Yeah.
where it's too much. And eventually your body goes to, we got to go to fight, flight, or freeze because we can't handle this any other way.
Right. Right. Um, so in your family, um, tell me about you have some of your kids working with you too, don't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, like I said, when I got sick, my kids were 1, 3, and 4.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden, they had a dad who was very involved in their life to a dad who was sick and very absent from their life. So, all 3 of my kids went through kind of abandonment like trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And so, 2 of them ended up in addiction, 1 ended up in a very dark, depressed place where they attempted suicide. But as I got healthier, not just physically, but began to understand some of my own trauma and heal, um, we were really able to help our children work through their stuff. So we have wonderful relationships with all 3 of our kids now, and our 2 daughters work for us. One runs our online program, the other runs our training for coaches and facilitators program. And then our son is actually looking to become involved. He's just got to sort out some stuff. So we're very grateful that because of our journey, we've been able to help them with their journey. And that's really what I try to emphasize with parents is when you wound your child, the solution is not just to rush in and try to fix them. That you got to fix yourself first.
Yeah.
So that you're a safe person, that they can actually connect with you. Then they're going to be able to heal. But if you're just remaining unsafe and you're trying to fix them,
Mm-hmm.
you're actually going to do more damage.
Did you go through a time of not knowing how to talk to your kids about these things?
Yeah, there was, I would say 2 parts to that. There was a part where I didn't quite have the vocabulary or understanding to be able to explain it all yet, but I was always totally committed to just listen and try to understand.
Yeah.
And listen without judgment. Just tell me what you're feeling and thinking. Help me understand
Yeah.
what's going on. I might not be able to figure it all out, but at least I want to be present to you.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. So when do you feel like you had a significant breakthrough with your kids?
each one would be at different times. The 2 that got into addiction, when they really kind of came to the end of the addiction, our whole thing with them was, we're still here for you, we love you, doors open. And so they reached out and just said, help me. And that was really good. And then the other one was always the super compliant child.
Mm-hmm.
And so I always had quite a good relationship with her, but she had her own struggles. And so that's just been a gradually growing thing that's
Mm-hmm.
been there. But yeah, to me, what's significant was for the 2 that got into addiction, things had to get worse before they got better.
Yeah.
And we had to be willing to patiently wait.
Yeah.
And not try to rush in and rescue.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes the natural painful consequences are the best motivator to change,
Mm-hmm.
and parents aren't.
So big T trauma, little t trauma, major catastrophic events versus the little foxes that spoil the vines,
Yep,
right?
exactly.
And so I'm thinking about how whether we go through the big T or the little t, when we're traumatized, is it kind of a given that we also will create trauma for others?
Yeah, so what happens? So if you think of a child who dad's a workaholic and is angry when he's home, mom's depressed and just super involved in church and taking care of everybody else's kids,
Yeah,
and they feel very neglected. Nobody's hearing them. They're just being told, live this way, be obedient, do what you're told.
yeah.
Nobody's taking time to listen to
So
their
that's creating
trauma.
trauma. Yeah.
Exactly.
And who defines if it's a big T or a little T?
So that they're not being abused,
Right.
so it's little t. So
Yeah.
there's a neglect element.
Yeah.
Their needs aren't being met. Might be good intentioned parents, but their kids are not
Yeah.
having their needs met properly.
Yeah.
It's mainly their emotional needs. Their
Yeah.
physical needs are met. But what happens in that child's mind is, must be my fault.
Hmm.
I must be doing something wrong. That's why I'm being neglected, is I must be bad, etc. So therefore, I must need to change. I must adapt my behavior if I'm going to get mom and dad to like me, if
Yeah.
I'm going to get mom and dad to meet my needs. So they start to adapt.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, I'll be a different personality. I'll be a super responsible child. I'll be a super funny kid.
Yeah.
I won't trust people.
Yeah.
I'll wear masks. I'll be a perfectionist, a people pleaser, but I'm going to do whatever adaptation gets me liked and gets my needs met.
Yeah.
So those adaptations
Yeah.
let the kids survive, and they look really good, but you get 30 years later in adult life and you don't trust anybody, you manipulate, you're a people pleaser.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden you realize those were actually maladaptations.
Right.
They set me up to fail.
Mm.
But it took me 30 years to figure that out, because the consequences didn't come in till 30 years after the event, and I thought they were really good adaptations. And so what happens by that point is, now I'm a dad,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm still living out my maladaptations, and I'm hurting my kids.
Right.
So it becomes a generational thing.
Yeah.
So that's, to me, the subtlety of complex trauma, is it usually ends up being a generational thing, because you don't realize your adaptations are maladaptations
Right.
until 30 years later, but by then you're already hurting your children.
I remember when I was early in my ministry years before I was married, and I was working in one particular church where I had a very poor relationship with the senior pastor. I just won't go into all the details of that. This isn't about me in this podcast, but I remember one time when I was sitting in my office, and I was old school, had my day timer open on my desk and my pen, and I'm plotting in the calendar, and I got a notepad, and just mapping out some things we were going to do with the youth group, and in my mind this thought bubble appeared of this board member in the church who was the kindest, sweetest man I think I had met to date at that point, and just a true gentleman. And in my mind, I pictured him kind of furrowing his brow and looking at me and going, disapproval, right?
Yeah.
And I remember the moment so fresh, where I just threw my pen down on the desk and I sat back in my chair and I said, God, what is that? And in one of those rare moments of feeling like God was saying something, I heard the response to my question, God, what is that? That's the fear of man. And I sat there and I thought about that, and then pop, 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 all these thought bubbles of people in my life that I had that shadow of disapproval,
Yep.
that sense of I better watch myself because they're not going to be happy with me,
Exactly.
and and so if that's the fear of man, I said out loud, I said, then I don't want that.
Yeah.
and it was actually this huge shift point in my life where I realized that that would be one of those, for me, little t traumas.
Yeah. Oh, very much.
Yeah, and it also helped me to understand something about when the Bible talks about deliverance, right? That delivers from evil.
Yeah.
That was a maladaptation. That was a distorted mindset that was exercising control
Yeah.
over
Yeah.
how I lived. And
Yeah.
I felt very fortunate to experience that deliverance.
Yeah. So if I can just kind of say that in a little different words. So you take this child that comes into the world fully authentic.
Yeah.
This is who they are. Their loving heart, giving personality,
Yeah.
emotional world is all just there. But then they get disapproval. They get
Yeah.
judged. They get rejected. You're too sensitive. You cry too much. Blah blah blah.
Yeah.
They get all of that, and so all of a sudden they feel I'm bad. I'm not good enough. Something's wrong with me. They personalize all
Yeah.
of that. But what begins to happen, and so complex trauma leads to a fear-based living that comes out of a very subconscious fear. You're often not even aware of it.
Yeah.
But it's everybody's going to judge me if they see the real me.
Yeah.
So I can't be authentically loving. I have to be always on guard that I get everybody else's approval.
Mm-hmm.
That's a fear-based life. That's not freedom. That's
Yeah.
not doesn't lead to joy and love. That is a very prison-like life. But complex trauma leads to fear as your main, deepest motivating force, not love.
Right. I think we're all feeling that in our society, aren't we?
Oh, very much.
That the things that would make people fearful sometimes have the loudest voices,
Yeah.
and so a lot of people are just living with that constant anxiety and vigilance, like, when's the shoe gonna drop?
Exactly.
So yeah, I won't ask a simplistic question. We probably need to delve a little bit more into how what React looks like, some of the programs that you're doing. In on your website, you described C-PTSD as an actual or realized ongoing experience during childhood which causes a youth to repeatedly feel unsafe or unloved, resulting in lifelong mental unwellness and unhealthy coping mechanisms. And that's what we've been talking about here, right? And then on your website, you also gave some stats, I believe, from Dr. Bruce Perry. 90% of parents that end up with their children in foster care are suffering from complex trauma. Over 90% of the incarcerated, 97% of people with addictions, over 90% of the homeless, 90% of victims of domestic abuse, many with mental health disorders, many with eating disorders, many with self-harm. So not only is it complex, it's pervasive.
Exactly.
And we're surrounded by it. And, so how do saner minds prevail? How do we, tip the scale in the other direction? You mentioned the word love as being essential. So just maybe unpack a bit about love.
Yeah. So Bruce Perry's work, he wrote a book, What Happened to You, and the purpose of that title is that when you look at kind of all of our societal programming and institutions to help homelessness, incarceration, etc.,
Yep.
what's really happened with that is, what's wrong with you? Smarten up. You're not being a very good citizen. You're the problem here. Just clean up your act. Instead of realizing they're acting out of their pain, so we shouldn't be going, what's wrong with you? We should be going, what happened to you that caused you to
Yeah.
cope with this the way you cope? And so when you look at all of the social institutions, they're basically putting band-aids on symptoms. They're not dealing with the core. Let's find out what happened to you.
Recovery programs with 10% or less success.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so it's really realizing that we got to help people begin to understand why they are coping the way they are, what pain they're accommodating or adapting to. But people who've been traumatized, they have to feel safe before they can go there.
Yeah.
And they have to have safe people that really accept and understand what's going on, that are going to help them process, give them time, space, not judge, before they're actually going to be able to go there. So the very first step in any trauma healing is you got to have safety. Because if you don't feel safe, you're going to go back to your maladaptive tools of survival.
Right.
You can only learn healthy tools when you feel safe. That's where you begin to trust. You begin to be honest and communicate and have empathy and all of that. So, to me, when it comes to healing trauma, there's really two important pieces. There's a huge education piece where people got to understand how trauma affected them, their nervous system, their brain, all their coping styles, all the subconscious world that's been running their life that they're not even aware of. So there's just tons of education, but they also need connection in a safe environment.
Right.
And so what is trauma basically? It's anything that breaks connection. So neglect, abuse, that breaks connection.
Right.
And that's where the pain, because now I can't resolve it. I don't have anybody to connect to that's going to help me resolve it. So a child can get hurt in a healthy home, but they're connected and they don't get trauma because they resolve the pain with the parent.
Right.
Trauma only comes when I can't resolve it because I'm alone. I can't connect.
Right. Right.
And so I need to provide a place to connect that's safe. But that's the scariest thing in the world, because to a child from trauma, every time I've tried to connect, it's only led to pain. Now you're saying I got to connect to heal? No, I don't see it as leading to healing. I see it as leading to more pain.
Right.
So they bump into this wall of fear. That the very tools that are healthy, well, I've tried them in the past with unsafe people, and they've led to pain. You're saying that if I try them with safe people, I'll get a different outcome? And I go, yeah, I don't know if I can believe that. Because my history is 100% of the time I've tried these tools, it's led to pain. And so it's realizing, but that was unsafe people. Now, you got to do it with safe people. And so it's a huge obstacle for people to say, I'm willing to go here and try this.
It's kind of like if you ate a rotten apple.
Yeah.
You would have a hard time being convinced that no, there's actually good apples too.
Exactly right.
Yeah. And so many of those impulses that we've acquired, there's a new kind of risk required, isn't it? Yeah. The risk of safety.
Yeah, and so for most people with complex trauma, they're relationship templates are all formed about their normal for relationships
Mm-hmm.
is all unsafe, unhealthy people.
Yeah.
But that's their normal. They figure
Yeah.
out how to manage that.
Yeah.
Now you put them with safe people and they feel unsafe
Yeah.
because I don't know what to do with these people.
Don't know how to read them.
I don't, yeah.
Don't know what's motivating
So
them.
if they're kind
Yeah.
to me, like, no, they must want something from me. They're
Yeah.
trying to manipulate me. I
Yeah.
can't trust kindness. I can't trust that.
Yeah.
And so it's a huge, when you got an old template that's your normal, but it's unhealthy,
Mm-hmm.
to go to a healthy template feels wrong. It feels unsafe.
Yeah.
And so it takes a while to actually kind of get used to that this is actually a safe place to be and it brings good results.
Mm-hmm.
And for most people, it's kind of 6 months to a year
Mm-hmm.
of kind of transitioning into accepting and feeling that this is okay.
So, the family, which should be the place of security and safety, can become, for some people, the place of little t or big T trauma.
Okay.
And the same could be said of churches,
Yeah. So what?
faith communities,
Yeah.
right?
So what we teach is that most complex trauma takes place within the family unit, but
Mhm.
then there's other spheres of influence. So you can go to
Mhm.
school and get trauma from a
Mhm.
bully, from a teacher.
Yeah.
You can go to church and get trauma. You can go into your culture as a
Yeah.
bigger sphere, and it's a racist culture, and
Mhm.
you're a black kid in a racist culture.
Yeah.
Like you got trauma. It's an unsafe environment. So there's different spheres where trauma can take place. Mainly it's the home, but any kind of community, institution, church, school, activity, sports stuff, whatever. You get
Mhm.
somebody in authority that abuses that authority, and somebody's going to get hurt.
Yeah. I think a lot of churches today have come to the realization that we have to have good protection policies to prevent the big T trauma abuse happening. Do you where do you think a lot of us in churches need to grow in the area of uh, being more loving, being just a little more safe?
Yep. So let me just kind of back up and tell a story with that. When I started out, I had a fellow that came to our treatment center, and he had been a member of the Hells Angels and got into addiction and kind of messed up his life big time. But
Mm-hmm.
came to our treatment center, became a Christian, and he came to me and really much of what I do today is initiated by him saying, Tim, you need to do something beyond just spiritual only solution, 12-step only solution, something that blends the science and the spirituality and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
But he asked if I'd take him to church, so I took him to church, and I thought it was a really good church service. Music was amazing, and all of that. And I got to the end, and I asked him, "How'd you like it?" He said, "I didn't like it."
Mm-hmm.
I go, "Why?" He said, two main reasons. He says, number one, everybody's happy.
Hmm.
I haven't seen one person sad. I haven't seen one person cry. I haven't seen one person talk about pain.
So we have to let
It's-
people be
He said, that's like my
true to
family,
the
where
yeah,
everybody had to be happy all the time.
yeah,
Nobody could be honest about their emotions.
yeah,
It was get over it, just be happy.
yeah.
And that doesn't feel safe. And I go, yep, you're right. And then he said, the second thing, I haven't heard one deep conversation.
Hmm.
He said, everybody's talked about the weather, sports, Bible verses, but nobody shared from the heart.
Yeah.
And he said, I don't feel safe there because we were never allowed to talk deep stuff because it made everybody uncomfortable.
Right.
And so to me, it's been very informative. And then to me, there's been a lot of stuff around, mental health issues that you should just get over it. You should just And so to me, it's a lot of Christian teaching in some churches is what I call spiritual bypassing. So you shouldn't have to sit in a painful emotion.
Mm.
Just just claim this promise and you'll be magically fixed. So
Right.
it's looking for a magic fix that bypasses
Right. Right.
hard work and sitting in pain for very long.
Yeah.
So we'll allow you to grieve for a week or be depressed for a couple of days, but if you're not over it by then
Yeah.
you're
Yeah.
a bad Christian.
Mm.
That's not a safe environment.
No.
That's all of a sudden what we thought was unconditional love is
It's
very conditional.
yeah. It's a very surfacey spirituality. It doesn't acknowledge
And so,
the
like,
nature of suffering. Yeah.
I say that many churches are like sun all the time church,
Mm-hmm.
where let's get everybody in a good mood and positive and emotionally on high,
Yeah.
and give them the idea that if they walk with the Lord, that's what their life's going to be like all the time.
Right.
And when you go to the Bible, that's no, the Psalms are lament Psalms. There's crying, there's mad at God, there's depression, there's
Well, the Bible's an encyclopedia of trauma.
exactly. And
Yeah.
so I think many Western churches have tried to just create this very feel good environment that's not reality.
Yeah.
But it gives people the expectation that that's what their life should be like. So when they
Mhm.
struggle, I must be doing something wrong, I'm bad. And then many churches only kind of give 4 basic tools.
Mhm.
So you need to read your Bible, pray, have faith, and go to church. And then
Yeah.
that's going to fix everything.
Yeah.
And I go,
Yeah.
we need more tools than just those 4. But
Yeah.
but if those 4 tools aren't working, then well, you're a bad Christian. Something's
Yeah.
wrong. You got sin in your life.
Yeah.
No, I think maybe you got some bad teaching happening here. So to me, what I would say is many churches, well-intentioned people,
Mm-hmm.
but because of kind of how they've been taught, they actually become unsafe for
Mm.
many trauma people.
Yeah.
And and the other piece to me with a characteristic of a complex trauma home, so in a healthy home, if a child does something like they get mad at their brother and hit him, the parents go, that's an inappropriate behavior, but we love you, you're valuable.
Yeah.
So the behavior's wrong, but you're still good.
Yeah.
Complex
The true
trauma.
nature correction, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Complex trauma, you did bad, you're bad.
Yeah.
And a lot of churches have done that.
Mm.
So you did something wrong, well, God's going to judge you. God's mad at you. You're
Yeah.
a bad person. And I go, whoa, what happened to Jesus sitting with prostitutes and
Mhm.
tax collectors and just loving and
Yeah.
being there for them? He wasn't up there. He was making a statement against the Pharisees.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I think a lot of, to me, evangelicalism is slid into Phariseeism,
Mm-hmm.
where if you do something wrong, then God, that's a sin, so God now judges you, and now we're actually going to get a hate on for you. And I go, I don't see that in Jesus at all. So
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
not the love that the Bible talks about. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
so the thing that I would get from clients that have spiritual abuse the most, or people who come into recovery from trauma and decide they want to go check out churches and get kind of involved
Mhm.
spiritually in that direction, many of them have come back to me re-injured.
Mm.
And it's because they went in and they thought this is unconditional love here. These people are so loving, until all of a sudden you're not following all the secretive rules properly. And all of a sudden there's this pressure put on you. There's this judgment.
Yeah.
Now we're going to kind of treat you a little differently because you're not fully submissive. And it's not to God's rules. It's to a lot of our little man-made
Yeah.
rules.
Yeah.
And so all of a sudden people are feeling ostracized or judged or disciplined. I wasn't doing anything wrong or unloving. I was just trying to be a healthy person.
Yeah.
And now, anyway, so
It goes back to that church culture thing or societal culture thing of don't make me feel
yeah,
uncomfortable.
so you
Don't-
better conform.
Yeah.
because it's
Yeah.
all about me feeling
Yeah.
comfortable.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so what I encourage church people to do is just be willing to honestly evaluate. Because we all want to convince ourselves we're loving,
Yeah.
and we deny a lot of the stuff that we do and don't really look at it critically.
Right.
And I think we need to,
Mhm.
because I think we're doing a lot more damage than we often see.
Yeah.
So,
In light of your understanding around complex trauma, how are we to look at, something that would come up maybe in a more extreme case in a church where a church needs to exercise discipline? What, how do we exercise church discipline, but do it in love? What do we need to avoid? Because I mean, historically, you've got those who would say, well, they have to be excommunicated and shunned. Others who would say, just forgive them and let them go back to teaching Sunday school. What's the big deal?
right.
So what do we need to learn in the area of healthy values in the church around behavior?
Yeah, so to me, it's been such an important question for me to think through for years and years deeply. Um, where I've landed on it is like, to me, the guiding command of the Bible is love your neighbor as yourself.
Yeah.
So you love God, that's your vertical,
Yeah.
but you love your neighbor as yourself. So any interpretation of any other part of the Bible that violates love your neighbor as yourself, treat them the way you want to be treated, is
Yeah.
a wrong interpretation.
Yeah.
And so if people are doing stuff that violates love, so they're hurting somebody else, they're sexually
Yeah.
abusing somebody else, they're physically abusing somebody else, they're cheating on their spouse, they're violating love. That's a
Yeah.
clear cause that we need to help them
Yeah.
get back to love. But if somebody's saying the F word,
Yeah.
well, that's just a good adjective for them. They're not
Yeah.
saying it to hurt anybody.
Yeah.
That's not violating love,
Yeah.
but it's violating my rule. And so to me, then, to say I'm going to excommunicate you because you swear too much, I go,
Hmm.
no, you're the one violating love here, not them.
Yeah.
And so again, it's any interpretation we have of a rule or a standard. Are they violating love, or are they just making me uncomfortable?
Mm-hmm.
And so what's been helpful to me is much of Western church culture has actually come out of shame culture.
Mm-hmm.
And shame culture basically said, we don't like ourselves, but we want to feel good about ourselves. So let's
Yeah.
create a culture where we get respect. So if you think of the kind of the British thing, well, I'm going to be kind of an earl or a lord, and everybody has to respect me, and everybody's got to do stuff for me. But then we're going to dress a certain way.
Yeah.
We're going to talk we're not going to talk like the people that work on the docks, because that's the low life people.
Right.
We're
Right.
going to talk more sophisticated, but then we're going to spiritualize all of that
Yeah.
and say, oh, that's swearing.
Yeah.
That's inappropriate dress.
Yeah.
And we create all these rules that aren't in the Bible. We can find verses to try to support it, but it's really supporting a shame-based culture,
Mm-hmm.
not a love-based culture.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all based on rank, and that certain ranks have to live and act
Right.
a certain way.
Right.
People down here, well, they don't act that way, so they're below us.
Right. And in some ways, it's demonizing
Oh, exactly.
the
Anyways,
people
not
that,
like us.
and in fact, maybe we demonize those that we feel most traumatized by.
Exactly. Yeah,
So,
and
yeah.
that was colonialism
Yeah.
with the indigenous people. Is
Yeah.
we're superior to you. You
Yeah.
need to learn our culture, and we're going to force it on you and make you stop your culture because we're way better than you.
Yeah.
And we destroyed a generation.
Yeah.
Well, it's multi-generational stuff.
Take me to your drawing board and give me a sketch or an outline of the programs that you give leadership to.
Yeah, so React is the in-person 12-week program. It's a day program, outpatient. And partly the reason for that was I'd worked with people in residential programs, and it was like they're in this protective bubble for
Yeah.
weeks, and they did super well. But as soon as they got back to the pressures of real life, they just went back to old
Yeah.
behaviors. And it was like, I want a program where they're going to be partly in a bubble, but partly dealing with life at the same time, so they can be applying tools from a safe environment into that world. So it really is around introducing people kind of academically to trauma, addiction, understanding how it affects them. So we go through the 60 maladaptations that come out of trauma, and keep it quite academic
Mhm.
till they feel safe. But they're in a group of about 10 people that they meet with every day. So they're developing connection, they're starting to open up and share. And that, so big part of the healing is the learning, but it's also the connection piece.
Yeah.
So they come together. And then, so phase one is 4 weeks where they really kind of keep it academic. Phase two, we go into the deep dive. Now we're going to go into the trauma. So in phase one, you've got the tools to handle some of the stuff that's going to come up and the emotions that are going to come up. But now we're going to really focus on healing that. But then, what does a healthy life look like? We've defined what unhealthy looks like.
Right.
So let's get to what does healthy look like, and then what are the tools to get to healthy. So that's all in the phase two part, and you get a coach to help you dig into your own stuff. But then what we found was 12 weeks is just, you're hardly out of the starting gate.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we added a phase
It's like
three.
learning 12 weeks of Japanese, right?
Yeah. So it was, you got to have ongoing connection and
Yeah.
ongoing teaching. So phase three is an open-ended, as long as you need it, continued to meet once a week. And then we also realized is that recovery can't just be this intense learning, sharing environment, because many people from complex trauma who've been in survival mode, they don't know what a healthy life looks like as far as
Right.
balance, fun, play,
Yeah.
relaxing. So we started to introduce just fun activities,
Yeah.
a day at the beach, going to a farm with horses and all of that kind of stuff, just so people begin to realize there's healthy ways of self-care,
Yeah.
taking care of yourself. So that, basically, we've got some people that have been with us for 4 or 5 years that just continue um, to realize I just need that connection every week and to be reminded of key things, or else I start sliding back in the
Yeah.
way.
Well, it reminds me of did you watch the TV series Lost?
Yes.
Yeah. And my wife and I are just rewatching it right now on Netflix. And the other night we were watching, and it was an episode where Hurley, um, uh, who's kind of interesting character in the show because he's always observing how the community is functioning,
Right.
and he comes to uh, some of them and he says, "Come here, I got to show you something," and takes him out into this green field, and he created a three-hole golf course.
Yes, I remember that one.
And
Yeah.
his point was, we've been through this horrible trauma together, and we're so focused on survival that
Exactly.
we're never enjoying life,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
so that's what you're talking about, is that when you go through this transition to wholeness, to well-being, you need ways to try it out,
Right.
What is it?
Yeah.
What is it like to
Yeah.
have fun
Exactly.
without all these preconditions?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what I basically, to summarize, teach that we're physical beings, intellectual beings, emotional beings, relational beings, spiritual beings. So
Yeah.
there's 5 categories there. Each one has a set of needs within those categories.
Yeah.
So we've come up with kind of 12 basic needs.
Uh-huh.
So what happens within trauma is some of those needs aren't being met. That's the
Mhm.
neglect, and it's usually kind of the emotional, relational
Yep.
needs. But then the problem is when people come into recovery is they think if I just meet 1 or 2 of these needs, I'm going to be healthy.
Yeah.
It's like, no,
Yeah.
you got to learn to meet all of your needs.
Yeah.
Intellectual, physical, emotional, spiritual, relational, and that's going to take some time to figure out. But recovery is learning to meet your needs in a healthy way, and that's what leads to joy, and that's what leads to contentment. But you have to role model that for people. You have to provide opportunities for people to do that. So, anyways, we started React. COVID hit, and we had to put stuff online.
Mhm.
And then the word got out that we had stuff online, and we started getting requests from people, different parts of the world, asking. So we put our React program, we switched it a little bit so it'd be doable better online and called it Lift.
Mhm.
And so now we have people from over 30 countries in the world that take that, and it's just exploded. So then we have, not everybody can kind of sit through a 12-week program. They're just not there yet. They're still either in the problem or they're just got too much going on. So then we just said we got to break this into kind of smaller little captions
Yeah.
that plant seeds. So we started
Yeah.
on root as just little snippets that we can plant seeds with people until they're able to do a little
Right.
more intense program. So it's just constantly realizing there's so many doors to
Mhm.
enter that will help people, and we have to be able to. We want eventually to lead them to a very in-depth healing process,
Mhm.
but you got to meet them where they're at and what they can tolerate and work
Yeah.
with that.
Now, your in your programs, they really are non-judgmental. You they're embedded with, I would say, good theology, but not in a um, strongly declarative
Yep.
Christianese way.
Yep.
So talk to me a little bit about, this, a little bit more about the theology of your approach, and maybe ways that you've seen the Holy Spirit at work
Yep.
in the lives of traumatized individuals.
So what I realized, when I started, I worked at a secular treatment center, and I'm very thankful for that because
Yeah.
I learned a ton. But I would, as clients got to know me, they would open up to me and start talking about spiritual stuff, and
Yeah.
I never initiated it. They just sought me out, and I began to realize the Holy Spirit's working in hearts. I don't need to be doing that. But what was interesting to me was there were 2 Christian treatment centers in our city,
Mm-hmm.
and almost 100% of the people that talk to me, I'd never go to that place.
Why not?
Because all they want to do is convert you to Jesus. They just try to shove it down your throat.
Yeah.
And many of them came out of spiritual abuse.
Mm.
And so if I hear the word Jesus, I'm out the door.
Yeah.
I'm not giving you a chance because I've been wounded by that.
Yeah.
Want nothing to do with that. And so I realized if I'm going to love these people,
Mm-hmm.
I got to take that out of there for now.
Yeah.
I've got to love them where they're at, deal with their trauma, and let God gradually bring some deep healing.
You
But
love your neighbor.
yeah,
Yeah.
but I came from the environment where, hey, our number one job is evangelism. We got to get
Right.
people saved,
Right.
and so we got to initiate having these talks with people. And I went, I think that's the totally wrong approach for
Mm-hmm.
dealing with people with severe spiritual abuse. And so we have people now from all over the world that they come and they know I'm a pastor, and they've told us after they've gone through the program, if you had said the word Jesus, I would have quit. Because I was severely abused in my church.
Wow.
And I went, I'm never going back to a church. I want nothing to do with that. Now, most of them find their way back to a relationship with God. It's just got it's never going to be kind of that evangelical flavor, but they come back to it. And so what I've seen is, to me, the church has to really rethink their evangelism mindset.
Yeah.
And realize that when you deal with traumatized people, especially spiritual abuse, if we don't change, we're actually alienating the people. And so that's where the people that came to me, I'd never go to a Christian treatment center. Never. And I went, yeah, I can see why. And so, but what I'd have is people coming to my office almost every day saying, can I talk to you about spiritual stuff?
Yeah.
And I go, fantastic.
Yeah.
Holy Spirit's healing, working, bringing stuff there. I don't need to be trying to shove anything down people's throat. And that's been the beauty, to me, of what so to me, another way that's been helpful for me is often our emphasis, I think, in the evangelical world is spirituality, but it's really vertical spirituality. It's your relationship with God, connecting with God, and we put all of the emphasis there. But to me, the heart of the Bible is horizontal spirituality. Love your neighbor as yourself. Get healthy. Here's what healthy looks like. It's horizontal spirituality.
Even love your your enemies. Right?
Exactly. So to me, it's, you know what, I'm going to work with people on horizontal spirituality. And that other one will take care of itself. And that's happened.
That's amazing. You're getting such an open door. I would say that you're being regularly handed the keys to the city with the work that you're doing. So tell me about Theo, and that's on YouTube. I'll link that interview that he had with you, and so people can go and watch that if they're interested.
Yeah, and again, it's another very interesting thing is before the interview started, his brother had watched some of my videos on YouTube and said to Theo, you need to watch this guy. I think it'll help you. So he started watching and sent us a request for me to come and do a podcast with him. But before the podcast started, he said, Tim, I'm deeply spiritual, but I want nothing about Christianity in this talk. And I said, perfectly fine with me. And so again, to me, there's developing a resistance that's actually quite justified in a lot of people toward this aggressive, we're better than you need to listen to us approach. But we've had people from the Muslim world, people from the Buddhism, people from all over the world that are athletes, executives, that are reaching out to us asking for help. And so to me, it's again, doors have been opening up that are just quite exciting. And now being able to translate into different languages has been opening up some neat opportunities as well. So it's
you must find yourself in pinch me moments.
Oh, very much.
where you're
see this on
you're
the radar
talking
when I started.
How did I end up here and talking to these people and like all over the spectrum too. It's not like you're not just trolling in the Christian ghetto. You're out there. You're going everywhere.
Yeah, and I would say 80% of the podcasts I do now are totally like not in the Christian sphere at all. They're just people that have been watching and are just, this guy
that's right on.
can help me and I want to talk to him. So so I just feel very blessed.
If a person is seriously impaired with a defensive self-defeating mindset for years, how would a person in recovery begin to recognize that they're healing from complex trauma?
Yeah, I think it's such an important question so what I tell people is this: you're still going to get triggered. So you're going to, let's say, go to visit your mom, and your mom's going to raise her eyebrow like she always did.
Yeah,
And
she found my button.
you're going to go to shame, you're going to go to feeling disrespected, all that. I said, you're still going to get triggered, but you can't control that part. But you can control now that you respond differently to the trigger.
Mm-hmm.
So now, instead of you getting angry and lashing out and or running away or going into people pleasing mode,
Yeah.
you can now choose to respond with healthy tools. And when people start to do that, it's empowering,
Mm-hmm.
because it's like, wow, this works. This, I feel better about myself. Yeah. It's bringing changes.
Yeah.
And so it's just realizing that there's thousands of little tools to learn. Every time I implement one, I'm going to start to see some positive results.
Yeah.
And that's going to encourage me to continue on. But it's relearning life, basically,
Mm-hmm.
because you've learned all these ways of coping and surviving that are maladaptive, and now you got to relearn how to do life.
Yeah.
So there's a lot to learn, and it takes time, and it's slow and messy,
Mm-hmm.
but
Mm-hmm.
it's doable.
Yeah.
So the other piece to me is you start to see kind of improvements with your kids and your relationships and how you respond to situations, but you then also start feeling better about yourself. Some
Yeah.
of the old tapes about it's all my fault, I'm no good, start to change. And so you get just kind of an overall healthier self-esteem that takes place.
Yeah. So in the show notes, I'll link to all the good stuff that I can find from you online. And I love the fact that when throughout spiritual history, God sets people apart,
Right.
and He says, "Okay,
Going a new direction here.
I'm taking you out of here, and I'm putting you here
Yeah.
for a special purpose," and that's, I think, part of the essence of holiness is that to get whole, to get more Christ-like, we need to be set apart. And that's what happened to you in your Christian life. Um, you got flattened,
Yeah.
but it was a necessary step in you being set apart for this work.
Yeah, and the part where I got set to wasn't even on my radar. I had
Yeah.
zero interest in it. I didn't prepare for any of that.
Yeah.
But all of a sudden, here I am, and I'm going, this is what I was made for, so let's go. And,
Yeah.
yeah. So that way God gets the credit for all of that.
Yeah. That's beautiful, man.
Good.
Yeah, so Tim, it's been great having this conversation with you, and I've been watching for afar and watching up close with people that I know in the community that are going through React, and just watching their aha moments and the ways that the Holy Spirit is using what they're learning to draw them closer to God, closer to what family is supposed to be, and I don't imagine that every negative experience that a person has can quickly be redeemed. Sometimes you have to sit in the suffering for quite a while before you see any light, before you see any hope. But I'm glad that God sat with you when you burnt out,
Right.
and when you were having to do that dramatic rethink of your life. And, and I'm curious too, you said that working on the farm was therapeutic. Why was that therapeutic?
I think it it was very peaceful, tranquil. Part
Hmm.
one. Part two, I think just working with animals has a very therapeutic
Yeah,
piece to it.
yeah,
And three, it let me kind of get my physical health back
yeah,
just by exercising every day, working
yeah.
physically. So all of those were key. And then I think fourthly, it just gave me space
Hmm.
to get back on my feet, to do a lot of deep thinking about where am I going, what's been happening here. And I needed that space
Yeah,
to be able to process a whole bunch of stuff. So
yeah. Well, it's great to have you as one of our healthy neighbors in Windsor.
my
And
pleasure to be here.
yeah, thank you so much for sitting with me today and talking about these things. This is really important.
Thanks for having me, Kevin.
That was Tim Fletcher, ladies and gentlemen. On our next episode, we're going to be having a conversation with Bob Gall. Bob Gall is in Edmonton, Alberta, and has had decades of experience walking with the Lord and being in all kinds of places of ministry, mostly urban centers, and want to just ask Bob in the interview about just some of the changes that he himself has experienced since he first came to the Lord. So join us again. Until the next episode, I'm your host, Kevin Rogers, and in our exploration of God at work in Canadian cities, this is Sidewalk, Skyline podcast.
Studio 61.